My mother didn't even wait for the chairs to settle, or for the gravy dish to stop moving down the table. She raised her cranberry-colored wine glass in front of the entire Thanksgiving gathering and delivered a sentence so sharp it sliced straight through the chatter. She announced that my brother Mason would receive the life insurance payout because apparently, at 41, I didn't need it. There was no whisper, no softening, no hesitation. Just a public decision handed down as if I were some distant acquaintance instead of her eldest child. Forks froze mid-air. Conversations collapsed mid-sentence. Even the fireplace crackling behind us seemed to snap in protest. I kept my expression calm, but inside, something settled like a lock clicking into place after years of being forced open. Before I take you deeper into that moment, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And when you hear the rest, tell me honestly, what would you have done? My name is Lauren Pierce, and for most of my life, I've learned to move quietly through rooms crowded with my own family. Not because I'm shy, but because quiet exposes what loud people try to hide. You develop an instinct like that when your mother is the kind of woman who worships control almost as much as she worships your younger sibling. Mason, 3 years younger and freshly separated, has been living back in Mom's house in Santa Rosa for the past 6 months. If you haven't guessed, he's the sun in her carefully curated solar system. He gets the reassurance, the sympathy, the soft landings. I get the expectations, the errands, and as always the paperwork. Paperwork. That word has haunted me longer than any holiday memory. When I was 20, Mom gave me a stack of routine documents, telling me they were simple address updates. I signed because I trusted her. But I still remember the corner of one page, the faint emblem I didn't understand then. Years later, while working through policy files at my job in Portland, I recognized it instantly: insurance. That discovery lived inside me like a bruise beneath the skin, not visible but never forgotten. Life in Portland gave me distance. I work as a data specialist now, the kind of job that teaches you to track timelines, catch inconsistencies, and notice when someone deliberately skips over a detail. It made me sharper, steadier, far less easy to manipulate. But none of that prepares you for your own family's strategy meetings disguised as holidays. So when Mom called last month inviting me to Thanksgiving at my Aunt Karen's house in Seattle, her voice felt too bright, too polished. She mentioned that the whole extended family would be there: relatives who thrive on drama, cousins who collect gossip like souvenirs. And then she added that she had important news to share, and she wanted every witness present. I should have known then what she was planning, but even I didn't expect her to announce my erasure before dessert. Aunt Karen's house has always been neutral territory. A wide open kitchen with pine cabinets, a long farm-style table, and the soft amber lighting she insists makes everyone look kinder than they really are. It's the kind of place where you expect peace, or at least a temporary ceasefire, not whatever my mother had planned. She hates making announcements unless she's sure the applause is guaranteed, so the fact that she wanted the entire extended family present was the first clue that something was off. When I arrived that evening, she hugged me right away. Too tightly, too long. Then she stepped back and looked at me with that familiar expression, the one she's used since I was a teenager, half evaluation, half expectation, as if I'd finally grown into the version of me she always wanted. It wasn't affection. It was assessment. My cousins were gathered around the island, laughing while they tore into a cheese board. Uncle Mike was already telling one of his dramatic fishing stories in the living room, arms waving wildly. The whole house buzzed with the usual holiday noise, warm and chaotic, but underneath all of it, something felt misaligned. Mom kept smoothing her sweater, adjusting the clasp on her necklace, pretending to be composed while her fingers betrayed her. Mason arrived a few minutes later. He had that worn-out look he's been carrying since the separation: tired eyes, forced smile, shoulders slightly slumped. He hugged me, and I hugged him back. Whatever tension existed between us growing up never managed to outweigh what we both survived under the same roof. As we took our seats, the shift in the room became unmistakable. The conversations around us felt thinner, stretched, like everyone sensed a storm drifting in but couldn't pinpoint the direction. Mom sat straighter than usual. Mason kept glancing at her. I already knew why. Because the truth, the part she didn't want anyone to know, was folded quietly inside my phone. Dinner barely had a chance to settle when the first fracture in the night appeared. Mom made an offhand comment, delivered with casual precision, about finally getting all the paperwork processed. Most people would have missed the significance, but I've spent my entire life decoding the meanings she hides inside neutral sentences. The words hit me like a soft tap on the glass, small, but enough to start spidering cracks. Emily looked up, puzzled, but Mom avoided her eyes. That was the first red flag. The second appeared when my cousin Jenna leaned toward me and whispered, "Your mom seems different tonight." I acted like I didn't know what she meant, but I'd already caught it: the stiff posture, the untouched plate in front of her, the way her shoulders tightened every time someone mentioned finances. Under the table, I lifted my phone just enough to unlock it. The email from the insurance company was still there. Review notice. Pending investigation. Documents under verification. Polite, professional, unmistakable. They were reviewing the claim Mom filed. I didn't need to reopen it. I knew the content too well. Beside me, Mason shifted uncomfortably. Across from me, Emily leaned closer and asked in a trembling whisper, "Did Mom say something to you about money?" For the first time that night, her eyes weren't tired. They were afraid. Emily has never been able to hide confusion. Her face telegraphs her thoughts before she even speaks, and right now every line of her expression spelled uncertainty. "No," I whispered back. "Did she say something to you?" Emily shook her head, chewing on her bottom lip. "She just keeps saying she has a surprise," she murmured. "But I don't know anything about insurance." That word insurance landed between us like something metallic, heavy, cold. Red flag number 3. Around us, the table continued, buzzing, forks tapping, chairs shifting, laughter rising without any idea what was simmering beneath the surface. Uncle Mike had spiraled into another animated work story. A cluster of older relatives argued over college football rankings. Aunt Karen moved gracefully around the table, refilling dishes and smiling like this was any other peaceful family holiday. But under all of it, I could feel something older and darker rising. A familiar tension, like the air before a storm. Then Mom did exactly what I knew she would. She leaned forward and launched into a sentimental retelling of how difficult Emily's year had been. She never used the word divorce, but she didn't need to. Every softened phrase and sympathetic sigh painted Emily as someone delicate, deserving someone who needed rescuing. And in Mom's world, rescue always comes with strings. That tone, gentle, trembling, calculated, snapped a memory loose. 10 years ago, in our cramped old kitchen in Santa Rosa, she slid a stack of update forms toward me and asked me to sign them before she forgot. Her voice had the same fragile quiver, the same dip of guilt she could never quite hide. I hadn't recognized it then, but now I understood it perfectly. Her guilty voice always gave her away. Tonight, it was practically shouting. I folded my napkin slowly, letting the cloth slide through my fingers as if those few seconds could anchor the room. But the truth was already moving, unstoppable. Mom was unraveling in front of everyone, thread by thread, and no one at this table, not my cousins, not my aunts, not even Emily, realized that something irreversible was about to happen. Except me. So when she lifted her glass to begin her announcement, I wasn't surprised. I was prepared. The collapse didn't come in one dramatic explosion. It came in tiny fractures, small shifts in her smile, a tremble in her breath, a break in her voice only I could hear. Mom raised her glass again, trying desperately to reclaim the authority she believed she still held. But on the very first word, her voice slipped. Barely. Almost nothing. To me, it sounded like a crack traveling through glass. She cleared her throat and tried again, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Before we get too deep into dinner," she began, "I want to acknowledge everything Emily has been through." Her gaze swept toward my sister, who froze mid-chew. "She deserves something good. A fresh start." Emily frowned. "Mom, what are you talking about?" Mom ignored her. She continued reading from the script she had clearly rehearsed. "Life hasn't been fair to her," she said softly. "So, when the opportunity came, I did what any mother would do. I made sure she'd be taken care of. If you ever..." The room quieted, unaware that they were standing on the edge of the truth. and she was seconds away from falling straight into it. It was a carefully planted sentence, a preemptive justification laid down like cushioning before the fall. And it wasn't meant for Emily at all. It was meant for the audience. The problem was, the audience wasn't on her side anymore. Aunt Karen's usually soft expression tightened, her brows sharpening with instant suspicion. My cousin Jenna stopped chewing mid-bite, fork suspended. Uncle Mike leaned back just enough to give the moment space, as if he sensed combustion on the horizon. Even the older relatives who typically supported my mother out of instinct were watching her now with an alert, cautious curiosity. Emily whispered again, louder this time. "Mom, what opportunity?" There it was, the first visible fracture. Mom tried to hold her ground. "It's complicated," she said quickly, waving her hand in that familiar dismissive gesture she had used to silence us our whole lives. But tonight it landed flat. No one moved away from the question. Emily's face hardened. "What did you do?" Her voice held something new, fear mixed with disbelief. "I could have jumped in then. I could have laid the truth out in clean, brutal lines. But real justice, the kind that doesn't scorch you along with the person who wronged you, requires restraint. So I stayed quiet. Silence is a scalpel when used correctly." Mom panicked in that silence. And then she made her next mistake. She looked directly at me. "Lauren, you understand, right? You know Emily needs help. This isn't a big deal." There it was. The second collapse, her attempt to pull me into her narrative, the same tactic that worked when I was 19 and signing papers I didn't understand. But I'm not 19 anymore. I've spent 2 decades learning exactly how leverage works. I met her gaze steadily. "Why don't you explain it to everyone?" Her breath caught. Small, but enough. The air around the table shifted, as if everyone inhaled the same question at once. Mom's voice sharpened, brittle. "There's nothing to explain." But her hands betrayed her. They trembled as she lowered her glass. Emily's eyes darted from those hands to me. "Lauren," she whispered, "did Mom file something for Dad's policy?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The weight of my silence filled the space more clearly than any accusation. Aunt Karen finally spoke, her tone firm, steady. "If there's something going on, this is the time to say it. Not after sneaking around behind your daughters." Mom snapped instantly. "I wasn't sneaking." But she had been, and everyone in the room knew it. The entire table tilted toward confrontation, like a tide pulling in. Mom was cornered, but I wasn't finished letting her unravel herself. I exhaled slowly. "We can talk about it," I said, "but we should talk about what was filed and by whom." The blood drained from her face. Not dramatically, but in a slow, undeniable wash of realization. The pushback had begun, not loud, not cruel, but precise. And for the first time in years, she understood she wasn't the only one who knew how documentation worked. It unfolded quickly after that, though not chaotically. More like a curtain lifting on a stage everyone had unknowingly stepped onto. Mom remained frozen, clutching her glass as if it were the only solid thing left. The entire table waited. They wanted her to say something, anything that might stitch the evening back together. But the thread had already snapped. The unraveling was complete. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The silence around her thickened, swallowing even the clink of cutlery. So I stood. Not abruptly, not theatrically, just steadily. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Truth doesn't require volume. It only needs timing. And this was mine. "Mom," I said, keeping my tone even, "why don't you tell everyone who filed the claim?" Every sound in the room vanished. Forks hovered mid-air. Someone shifted back in their chair, the slow squeak slicing through the hush. Even the warm hum from Aunt Karen's kitchen felt suspended. Across the table, Emily's eyes widened. "Filed what?" Her voice came out sharper and louder than she intended, almost frightened. It split the last threads of control my mother was clinging to. Mom snapped her head toward her. "Emily, not now." But Emily pushed her chair back and stood too, her legs trembling. "No. I want to know what Lauren is talking about." "What claim?" Her question cracked through the room like ice breaking. Mom's lips trembled. She turned toward me with a look that lived somewhere between warning and desperation. "Lauren, stop being dramatic. You're misunderstanding." "I'm not." I said quietly. And you know I'm not. Aunt Karen placed her hand on the table, her voice steady. We all deserve to know what's happening. Secrets don't survive long in this family. Mom swallowed hard. It's just paperwork, nothing serious. There it was. Paperwork. The same word she used when I was 19 signing forms I didn't understand. The same word she deployed whenever she needed one daughter compliant and the other oblivious. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My fingers were steady. Hers weren't. I didn't want to do this tonight, I said. But since you've involved everyone, they should hear the truth too. Mom's eyes widened. Lauren. I tapped the screen and opened the message I'd read a dozen times over the past 2 weeks. The subject line alone tightened the air around the table. Pending review. Claim investigation. I didn't read every line. I didn't need to. I read the parts that mattered. It says, I began slowly, that the insurance payout for Dad's supplemental policy is temporarily frozen. The company received a claim submitted under his file, but there are irregularities. A murmur rippled through the room. Emily pressed a hand to her mouth. I continued. They're investigating potential issues with the signature and beneficiary information. Mom's knuckles turned white around her wine glass. Lauren, you don't understand how complicated these things are. It's set in Tong 7 dime. I actually do, I replied, calm as steel. You filed the claim. You signed off as the contact. You listed Emily as the sole recipient, and you didn't tell either of us. Uncle Mike leaned forward, eyebrows raised. Wait, she listed only Emily? Mom's composure cracked so abruptly it was almost audible. She needs the help, she snapped, voice shrill. Emily's face crumpled, confusion and hurt crashing across her features. Mom, what did you do? And finally, the truth stood exposed between all of us. The storm had arrived. Not loud. Not chaotic. Just undeniable. Lauren has a job, a life, a home in Portland, Mom said sharply, desperation leaking through her voice. She's fine. Emily needed. Emily gasped, the air catching in her throat. Mom, you did this for me? Without telling me? You filed something under Dad's name without even asking? Mom reached for her hand, but Emily jerked away as if burned. Tears gathered in Emily's eyes, not soft, fragile tears, but the stunned kind, the kind that come when the ground shifts violently beneath you. How could you use Dad's name like that? How could you hide this from us? Mom's voice collapsed into a hoarse whisper. I was trying to protect you. No, I said quietly. You were trying to control us, both of us, just like always. Mom's gaze snapped to mine. But for the first time, she really saw me not as the daughter she could manage, but as someone who finally saw through her. Why would you do this? She whispered. Why would you go to them? Because they emailed me, I answered. To verify the signature, to confirm I knew what had been filed, and I didn't, because you never told me. Just like when I was 19 and you slid those forms across the counter. Mom sank back into her chair, her shoulders folded inward, her entire frame seeming smaller. Aunt Karen crossed her arms tightly. You forged something, didn't you? Mom erupted. I did not forge anything. The outburst was too quick, too sharp, too defensive, close enough to the truth that everyone felt it. It was just, I handled it, Mom stammered. Emily's had a terrible year. I thought, if I explained everything later. But you weren't going to explain it later, I interrupted. You were going to let me find out when it was irreversible. Mom's breath shuddered, her mask slipping completely. I was going to tell you both. Emily stared at her mother, voice trembling. When? After the money hit my account? After you painted me as the needy one and Lauren as the villain? After you made us characters in your project instead of your children? That one hit like a hammer. Mom flinched visibly. The room simmered with disbelief. Older relatives exchanged worried looks. My cousins stared down at their plates, stunned into silence. No one defended her. For the first time in years, silence wasn't my burden. It was hers. I placed my phone on the table, screen facing her not as a weapon, but as a mirror. I didn't come here to embarrass you, I said. But you made a public announcement about something you had no right to do in private. Mom's eyes reddened. Everything I did was for this family. No, I said steadily. Everything you did was to convince yourself you were holding this family together. Emily wiped her face, stepping back as if reclaiming physical space. I don't want money that came from a lie. Her words cracked something inside Mom, not anger, but collapse. Her shoulders softened, her hands dropped, trembling openly. I didn't mean to hurt you, she whispered. I exhaled, not triumphant, not cruel, just deeply tired. You did, but it doesn't have to stay that way. The room settled around those words. A slow, collective breath. This isn't revenge, I said. And every person at the table leaned in, waiting for what came next. I just wanted the truth to stop hiding in paperwork. That was all. For a long moment, no one moved. The room felt suspended, as if even the air understood what had just shifted. Then, under the table, Aunt Karen gently reached for my hand, a small gesture, but grounding. Emily exhaled shakily beside me. And Mom. She finally bowed her head. That was the real turning point. Not the confrontation, not the accusation, but the quiet acceptance that the truth had caught up to her in the one place she never expected to be held accountable. Around that long wooden table in Seattle, the power she'd gripped for years slipped through her fingers, and for the first time everyone saw clearly who had actually been holding this family upright. The days after Thanksgiving felt strangely still, the kind of quiet that settles after a storm once the sky has already chosen its direction. I flew back to Portland with the same small overnight bag I'd arrived with, but inside, something felt different, lighter, like I had finally put down a weight I'd been carrying since I was 19. A week later, the insurance company called. Their review was complete. The payout wouldn't go to a single person. It would be divided exactly as the original policy intended, equally, transparently, without interference or manipulation. The representative apologized for any confusion. Instead, with men. I didn't tell him the confusion had never come from their end. That evening, Emily called. Her voice trembled, but not from weakness, from honesty. A kind of honesty I hadn't heard from her since we were kids sneaking into the pantry for cookies. She told me she had confronted Mom privately, that she'd pushed back against every attempt Mom made to justify what she'd done. She said she didn't want money born from secrecy. She didn't want to live inside a version of our family where guilt was gift-wrapped and handed out as affection. Then she said something I didn't expect. Thank you for telling the truth before it swallowed us. As for Mom, the fallout came fast. Relatives called me, not to gossip, but because they were disappointed in her. They gave her space, not out of punishment, but because they didn't know how to approach someone who had crossed a line she'd spent decades pretending she could redraw. Eventually, Mom sent me a message, not an apology, more like an acknowledgement that her choices had consequences she could no longer outrun. I didn't respond with anger, but I didn't respond with forgiveness either. Some things take time, some truths need silence to settle before they can mean anything at all. What mattered was simple: the lie didn't win. And for the first time in my life, neither did she. In the weeks that followed, I kept thinking about how a single sentence can tilt the ground beneath a family. Not the yelling, not the blame, but the truth finally spoken where everyone can hear it. For me, that sentence changed everything. It didn't erase the past, but it stopped the cycle. And sometimes, that's enough. Sometimes the quietest line is the one that finally breaks the pattern. It's how we reclaim the parts of ourselves we were taught to shrink. And if my story mirrors anything you've lived through, I want you to know this. You're allowed to set down the burdens you didn't choose. You're allowed to break the cycle. Support this channel, share your thoughts, and let's remind each other that honesty, quiet, steady honesty, can change everything. If any part of my story felt familiar, share yours in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, make sure you subscribe so you never miss what comes next.